Mark Evanier, that's Steve Sherman, that's Tom Kraft, that's Paul, that's Levine. And my mic is now on. I taught everybody else how to turn their mic on except myself. I've been doing this. How many years have I been doing this convention today? Thank you. Welcome to the 8,000th Jack Kirby panel. And the reason we do these, obviously, is that we come to a comic convention. We look around, we see Jack everywhere in some form or another. We see people, we see characters of his, we see concepts of his, we see people who wish they could draw like he did. We see styles, we see visual excitement, we see his inspiration and materials he touched and materials he never touched. So we talk about Jack a lot, and it seems like a good time a good idea every convention to at least set aside an hour to talk exclusively about him. Steve and I had the privilege of being his assistants starting in 1970 for a couple of years, and we're friends of the family for as long as there was a family there. And there still is a family, just doesn't have Jack and Roz in it anymore, unfortunately. Tom Kraft is the, what's your official title? Curator, president? President of the Jack Kirby Museum and Research Center, which is doing a wonderful job of preserving Kirby work everywhere. Have you found any great stuff this convention?
Yes, some interesting things. Sure.
Okay.
X-Men pages, a complete Black Panther story.
Wow. Okay. And Paul Levine is an attorney who's currently representing the Rosalind Kirby Family Trust. I got the name right. And
Kirby Estate, and I represented Jack in the 1980s this is when I met Mark, from 1981 through 87.
Anyway, and full disclosure, Paul is my attorney, so I am prepared to sue anyone who asks a question I don't like. Briefly, I want to say something at the top of this because I'm supposed to give like a little keynote idea here. There used to be a saying in the Vietnam era, we should just say we want to go home. A lot of us have spent a lot of time fighting for Jack Kirby to get proper recognition. Proper recognition as an artist, proper recognition as a creator, proper recognition as a writer, proper recognition as the guy who was behind some of the most important comic books and trends ever in the industry. There's still a lot of people battling this on the internet and fighting and such, and I think some of us should say we want to go home because Jack has never been bigger. More people know about him than ever before. Every week there's a big article in some newspaper about how Jack Kirby has not gotten his proper recognition, but he was the guy everybody said had all the ideas, or most of the ideas in Marvel Comics. I am very pleased by this. I hope that everybody is. You're happy about it, aren't you?
I'm thrilled.
You know.
Couldn't be happy.
And people always ask me, what would Jack say about the fact that the Black Panther is the highest grossing movie in the history of high grossing movies?
It's the 5th highest grossing film in history.
Wait till the weekend's over. Before, what would Jack have said? He would have said, what took them so long? I like having Steve with me on these panels because he can, I heard Jack say things like that. Jack would say, you can take any comic book I've done and then use that as the shooting script for a movie. And darn near they've done that in many cases, and sometimes spent millions of dollars building what he did for $40 on the page. And no, not everybody knows this, but it takes this stuff time to propagate. It takes time sometimes for people to readjust their thinking of what they used to think, who they used to think did stuff. There's a saying in show business, whatever people know you for first is what they will think you are before, after, and after. They just, it's like if I tell like Jim Davis, if he ever cured cancer, it would be like Garfield creator cures cancer, because they knew him first for Garfield. People who knew Jack first as an artist and didn't know that he had so many of the ideas in the comics he did will always think that he's an artist who maybe expanded into ideas or writing or something like that. And in fact, Jack's whole career, he was a writer and a creator. And he wrote more of the comics he drew before he went for Marvel than most people think. He drew a lot of them, but he also wrote a lot of them. And the other thing that is very interesting to me is that people are starting to really they always were envious that we knew Jack, and now they're really getting envious of this.
Really?
Yeah,
Oh.
yes. I mean, I guess I probably have a dozen people at this convention so far stopping and said, "Oh God, I wish I knew Jack. I wish I'd met him. I loved his work so much. I wish I could have told him how much he meant to me." And that goes on. It's a nice little perk we didn't know about when we took on the job.
No. Well, he was beloved even
Yeah.
back then. Lines of people
We every time I go to
lining up for tuna fish.
every time I go to Cantor's Delicatessen in Fairfax, which is where we went with Jack and Ross that day, Jack and Ross said, "Where can we take you guys to lunch?" And I said, "Cantor's Delicatessen," and Jack had potato pancakes. I don't know why I remember all this stuff.
I don't know either.
And we said, Jack told us, "I'm leaving Marvel." He swore us to secrecy. "I'm leaving Marvel. I'm going to DC, and I want you guys to work with me on this stuff." And Steve and I looked at each other. It was like,
Sure, right?
"Yeah, that's fine, okay."
And it went downhill from there.
That's right. We didn't discuss money. That was our mistake. We didn't discuss
Yeah,
money.
no.
It was
We just
fine.
said, sure.
We would have paid him for the experience. Let me just ask. Let's go down the line here, and then it's kind of like, what have you been doing lately, Steve? Tell people what you've been up to in the non-Kirby phase of your life here.
Well, I have a company called Puppet Studio in North Hollywood, and we do puppets for film, television. We worked on Men in Black 1 and 2, Mighty Joe Young, DC Follies, and Beatman's Drum. That's what I've been doing since not doing comics, which I got out because I saw how they treated Jack, and I said, well, they're not going to treat me any better, so long.
Have you applied things you learned from Jack to puppet making?
Oh yeah, constantly, because just Jack's work ethic was so strong that once you worked with him and saw how hard he worked, you couldn't do any less. So it's always been like, in the back of my mind, how would Jack do this? What would Jack think? Especially designing puppets, going like, well, let's see, what would Jack, how would he go about it? So sure, no, it was a great education in terms of learning design and writing and just how to be a professional. Because really, that's what Jack always prided himself on being, was professional. You just have to be professional, on time, don't screw up, give 110% no matter what, even if you aren't happy with what they're having you do the best.
Even if you know you're going to be swindled,
Yeah.
even if you know you're going to have your work trampled on by other people, yeah, you've got to be happy with what leaves you. And I always had this feeling that Jack's attitude sometimes was he'd get up in the morning and he'd go to the drawing table about 1 o'clock or something. He'd work nights a lot, and he's got there a pile of blank paper, some of which we cut for him.
Yeah.
And he's got a bunch of pencils. He's got an eraser. He's got this really ratty drawing. It was when I first met Jack. I have a better drawing table than Jack.
You did.
Yes. And I thought his attitude was like, okay, I'm going to sit down with essentially nothing. At the end of the day, I'm going to have fed my family for a week. He was very proud that he made something. There's an analogy there. You sit down and make a puppet. When you're done, there's going to be a puppet that wasn't there before.
Right. And then hopefully the client's happy. It goes away happy. Sometimes they're not. That's the way it goes. But I think he also enjoyed the fact that he was entertaining himself. Because when he sat down, he had that movie in his head, and he couldn't wait to get it down on paper. It was just a need to get it out there and for everyone to see it. So I think that was part of what drove him to is he just loved seeing the movies that were in his head on paper, just right there.
And he loved movies also.
Oh, yeah.
Generally, yeah. So,
Which brings up, I guess, New Gods.
Yeah, New Gods. Yes, there's a New Gods
Which is the
movie.
big
More or
news.
less in the works.
Yeah.
Remember how they told us that New Gods would never have merchandising?
Oh, yeah.
And would never be licensed or anything? The guys at Licensing Corporation of America, which was DC's merchandising arm, essentially said, we've got Superman, Batman, and Wonder Woman. What do we need your characters for?
This is Jack Kirby after Marvel. Your stuff for. I'm sure. Well, those guys aren't around.
But DC eventually saw the light, and then came to Jack and said, let's do some merchandising, we've got, et cetera. And that's the deal that I did for him when you, Mark, and Jack first came to the office.
It's so satisfying. I remember a moment when, there was a big struggle for Siegel and Schuster to get recognition on Superman. And I went to the Writers Guild screening of the first Superman movie, the Christopher Reeve one, which was the first time those guys got screen credit. And we're sitting there, and all of a sudden it says Superman created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster on the screen. And there was an outburst in that. I'm not sure if it was comparable in places other than the Writers Guild Theater, but in that room, there was like a cheering and a screaming and a catharsis, and we were all so happy. Everybody in that room, even if they didn't know the details as well as some of us, they knew that Siegel and Schuster had been screwed out of their credit for years and years and denied their existence. And I guess being writers, we're very sensitive to people not getting credit for what they deserve. And people just were cheering about that, so happy. And then I was at the world premiere of the Justice League movie at the Dolby Theater with an after party that I think cost more than the movie. And there was that moment, a single screen credit comes up, says fourth world created by Jack Kirby. And there was a scream that went out, and amazingly it wasn't from me. Yeah, Jack! And somebody was just so happy about that. I'm sure for some people it was the best part of the movie. But here's this stuff that's got a life like that, and it's in a movie that cost $100 million to make or whatever. And Jack saw that this was all going to come. Right? It's amazing to me. Anyway, Tom, tell us what the museum's doing these days. Is there any possibility of a brick and mortar one soon?
We're hoping someday, and it'd be nice to get more memberships and more support, but we're currently laying the foundation to do more with the museum this past year. We've been very active in exhibitions. We're in Lisbon, we've been in France, Switzerland, supporting different exhibitions with scans of arts, because we have a Kirby digital archive that started 10 years ago, where we're trying to archive all of Jack Kirby's art. So we have some art. We bring scanners to most of the conventions, trying to scan and archive the art. And currently we're over 12,000 pages and counting. We've been doing it for 10 years. And so that's a big project. And another project is our oral history project we started last year, where we're interviewing people like Steve Sherman last year, and we'd like to do Mark Evanier as well, with, and you too, and Paul, with little tidbits of experiences with Jack, not so much about Jack being like the inspiration for my work and things like that, but more about, I went to visit the house, Jack told me this interesting story. So it's little tidbits of little stories that we're trying to archive into a big digital oral project. And that also includes a list of all the interviews that he's done. We've had some contributions of audio tapes that nobody's heard before, so we're digitizing all those into text, transcribing them. We want to make all these things available online in a searchable database, including the collection of 12,000 pages. And we're getting volunteers to help image processing right now. So we're doing a lot of projects right now, so we're very busy.
12,000 pages, that's a lot.
That's more than Jack did in a month.
Well, it's probably about 7,000 pages of art and about 7,500 pages of pencil photocopies.
Wow. Tom, when you set up at a museum at a convention, people walk by and they see Jack Kirby Museum. What's the reaction? I mean, you're getting a reaction probably from people who wouldn't come to a panel like this, who don't want to hear the intimate details of Jack put in his French fries and whatever. The important stuff we talk about. What kind of reaction do you get from people as they pass the booth?
A lot of nostalgic. They talk about their experience growing up with Jack. They talk about their first Jack Kirby comic and how it influenced, and some artists come by as well, say that they've been really influenced by Jack in the work. And of course, there's questions about where is the museum? Can I visit the museum? And it's virtual right now, so it can't be at jackkirby.org, and that's the only place right now. And then there'll be a collections website. But really, it's a lot of I guess just like personal experiences of growing up with Jack and comics, and, how it changed their lives.
Give me a wild guess. What's the Kirby character or property that is mentioned most by those people?
I would say probably Fantastic Four and Captain America.
All right. Paul, when you look back, and you know an awful lot about Jack's history before he came to you. Finish this sentence for me. Boy, I wish Jack Kirby had had a better lawyer in his life because blank.
Because if I was born in the 1930s, or so, when I started practicing law, when Jack started with Marvel, the entire world would be very different.
Do you think that, there's a period there where Jack had a lawyer in 1969 who Marvel just would not talk to. He just would not answer his call, would not return his calls, and if he got somebody on the phone, they say, sorry, we don't talk to lawyers. What does, I don't want to ask you for legal advice here, but thinking back here, what does a lawyer, if that lawyer said to you there was nothing we could do, what would you say?
Of course there is. You just have to be persistent and stubborn.
All right. What are your impressions of Jack in terms of dealing with a guy as a client? To the extent you can, without violating the attorney-client privilege.
Yes, of course. As you said over the years, Mark, at these panels and at the panels in San Diego, Jack cared most about his credit and his reputation. So I know he was absolutely thrilled when I was able to, for example, make sure that he got credit when it was announced that Canon Pictures was developing the first Spider-Man. He couldn't get credit on the comic books because of Marvel and people who worked for Marvel, who shall remain nameless. At least he could get credit on the movies when credit was due. And I think today he would be thrilled to see the credit that he's getting on the Black Panther.
Okay. Let's briefly go down the line here. Steve, you and I met Jack in 1969.
Yeah.
We went down to his house in Irvine.
Right.
I had been there once before without you, and then you and your brother Gary, and we all went down one day and sat there. What was your first impression of Jack and Oz?
They were very open and very nice and very warm. It was kind of a shock to see where they lived because they had just come from New York, so there was hardly any furniture in the townhouse. And we went upstairs to one of the bedrooms that turned into Jack's studio. And the only thing that was in there was a drawing table, his tabouret, and that was it. And it was empty, and a chair. And he was working on Thor, as I remember. He was doing a Thor page. And it was just kind of strange to see him drawing this without any reference. There was no, you would see cartoonists in their studios and they would have pens, pencils, and books and all kinds of stuff. Here was a guy who was sitting at this ratty old table and just, with a number 2 pencil, just cranking his stuff out. And it was kind of a shock because you just think, wow, that's it.
Now, I remember from that visit, and maybe I'm merging another later visit with that, but I think it was the first one when you came down there. We went down together. Jack had just drawn a story for Chamber of Darkness, I think it was, called The Monster. And they made him revise it and ruin it. And he was angry. He showed us the pages where he erased, you could see, he erased the old story under it. And Roz was saying, oh, I wanted him to preserve that story and draw what they wanted on fresh paper to save it. And Jack, almost like to punish them, and he said to us, last night I sat here and erased the best story I ever did. And he was pretty unhappy with it.
He was always, because once he drew something, he was happy with it. He couldn't understand why anybody would want to change it because he's Jack Kirby. Why would you question it?
Well, the thing was that when he erased a lot of his own pages, obviously.
Right.
But it seems to me he never, what I can tell, he never erased something because the drawing was bad. He erased it because it was wrong. He decided he'd drawn the wrong thing there, and the story could be more exciting.
Right.
Something different happened, or the angle could be a different angle.
Yeah.
But it was not the question like, oh, I could draw that same exact panel better.
No, it was if there was a panel and Yeah, no, that's the only time he would have raised.
Yeah, I remember, and maybe you don't remember this, he was doing Jimmy Olsen, and he had a scene where Superman was flying at the readers like this. It was the same pose he'd used on a Human Torch cover. It was the same pose he used on a Black Bolt drawing that was done for a magazine. It was a pose that Jack had used several times. And being an occasionally rude and thoughtless teenager, I said to him, "Oh, you're using that old pose again." And he went, "What?" And I said, "You've used that pose before." And Jack went, and it was gone. I mean, I never saw him with that pose again. It was a perfectly fine drawing. I thought, "Oh, I made Jack Woodard a." You remember we used to when we were doing the magazines, the Days of the Mob and stuff like that. The original art size for those was 11 by 15. The original size for the Jimmy Olsen New God stuff was 10 by 15. And we had cut Jack 2 piles of paper, 11 by 15 and 10 by 15. That's the image area, not the paper area. And he had drawn a whole issue of Jimmy Olsen on 11 by 15 paper.
Mm-hmm.
And you may remember this. I pointed this out to him, and he turned to me and said, "Oh, okay, hand me a eraser here. Take an inch off each page." And I said, and you can kind of pick out which issue is because the center line is not in the center when he divided the page that way. And I sat there, and I actually had to erase some Kirby drawings and ask him to redo. Could you draw this guy over here? He was fine with it, but I was just kind of a nervous wreck about it. Did he give you any assignments like that you remember being terrified of?
Oh, yeah, remember when he had us redo the romance comics?
Oh, yes, that was awful.
At one point, DC was reprinting romance comics, and they had all these black and white stats, which were this size of 1950s romance comics. And what they wanted was the costumes and hair redone. So what you had to do is take white out and white out everything. So all that was left was a face in the background. And Mark and I each took a page and we started. And after about an hour, we said, "We can't do this. This is like," because the pencil would hit the white out and it would like crumble and do that. So Jackson, okay. So he gave the whole thing to Mike Royer, and I think Mike did the whole thing with an ink. He just inked it all.
Yeah, no, Jack had said to New York, people in New York, "I got these guys working, I gotta give them some work, give me something." So they sent those out.
Yeah.
And it was beyond our drawing abilities and the technical limit.
Well, technically, it was just the wrong thing to do because, first of all, it should have been blown up and put on, different paper, and, but trying to white out, not only trying to white out ink, but then draw over it.
Yeah. I have a point of history here that is Jack arrived at DC just in time to kind of be there when they destroyed romance comics. He and Joe started them, and they kind of got killed off in the early 70s. And what had happened was that sales were down because it was kind of hard to do real stories convincing stories about romance in the late 60s when everybody was sleeping with everybody else, and you couldn't do that in comics. And also those comics were sometimes being written by 65-year-old people and drawn by 70-year-old people, and they were supposed to appeal to a teenage girl audience. So DC kept doing them cheaper and cheaper. And they would take reprints from the 50s or early 60s and change the hairstyles, which would never have worked with superhero comics. Why was it going to work with romance comics? And of course, this meant that the main artist on DC's romance comic, Vince Colletta, needed something else to do because he wasn't working much, and that's how Chet Vince became Jack's inker on those books for a while. And nobody's really tried romance comics since then because they kind of destroyed them back then. Anyways, do you have any other memories, Steve, you want to share with people?
Well, I've been thinking about, since they announced the New Gods movie, just, how it was back then. And remember when we sat at Jack's kitchen table and he brought out Mr. Miracle?
Yeah.
And he said, "Okay, now, what color should he be?" And we said, well, because he had I think you've all seen his reprinted in Kirby Collector of the original coloring of Mr. Miracle.
Which wasn't really Mr. Miracle, actually.
No.
It was kind of a character that guy with that drawing was not an escape artist.
No, he was just he was one of the New God superheroes, but not Mr. Miracle. So Mark and I were going, well, and then that Jack gave us, he says, no, He said, the three main colors are blue, red, and yellow. And those are the best comic book colors.
Well, and because Jack was harkening back to a day when comic book printing was even worse than it was in 1970,
Yeah.
when they had trouble getting these things registered. And that's why the original Green Lantern wasn't all green, because he was like red and blue and a little green on it, because they didn't do green characters for the most part. Some people didn't do it. There were obviously a few. So we said that Mr. Miracle could be red and green and yellow. And Jack said, no, green doesn't work in comics. And I said, yes, it does these days. Green Lantern, Green Arrow. I mean, you should remember Green Arrow, Jack, who drew it. And he looked at some current comics and said, I guess green does work these days. So we went on, we did the color scheme for Mr. Miracle.
Right.
And the main, of course, impetus, this was that DC had designed one that made it purple and yellow. And Jack just hated it.
Yeah.
There were one of the many turning points in Jack's relationship with DC was that he made what was a political error. It was an honest error, it was a political error of telling the people at DC he did not think they did the greatest coloring in the history of comics. And he did not like their coloring, and DC, that was like going, to the Pope and saying, I don't believe in the Bible, and something like that. It was really, they were furious. I mean, how can you not think we do the best coloring? And Jack said, I think Marvel's coloring is better. And they clutched their hearts, and boy, did they hate him for that.
Oh, yeah. Amongst them.
So,
Well, you have to remember that the two people in charge, Jack Adler and Saul Harrison, had been there since 1939. This is 1970. So for Jack to come in and say, guys, I don't really appreciate the work you're doing for me, they were like, oh, we're going to be here till we retire. So,
remember when we met Saul Harrison, Steve and I went back to New York in July of 1970, and Saul sat us down, and the first thing he said was can't you get Jack to draw more like Kurt Swan? like we're going to, first of all, change how Jack Kirby is drawing. Nobody could have, but we least of all.
we're going to back say, hey, Jack.
Yeah.
What you're doing is just not right.
We understood DC Comics a little better at that moment.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
Anyway, we're going to take questions here from anybody who wants to answer. I think we got a little time here. Anything you want to know about Jack? Yes, over here.
So I know that in the tech world, there's like this whole Steve Jobs, Steve Wozniak rivalry, and you've gotten interviews and movies and lots of information about that. So why isn't there a similar kind of thing with Jack Kirby?
You mean a movie or something?
And Stan Lee you're talking about?
Yeah.
There is. I have a book I'm finishing up hopefully this year about Jack. And I've already got two people talking about an option for movies and things like that, sight unseen. Jack's story will be told somewhere. I had a friend who was working, this is years ago, a friend of mine was working on LA Law. And they did a script that never got produced, and it was going to be basically a romantic left of Stan and Jack. And they called me up and they said, who should play Stan and who should play Jack? Now this is 1984, I'm not sure when it was. And both these men are passed away, they're both alive. I said, get Paul Winchell to play Stan and get Howard Morris to play Jack. And I still think that would have worked, but they never did the episode. It'll be done. Everything's going to be done. We will hopefully all live to see it all. But we're going to see probably every character Jack did adapted somewhere. Probably everything he did reprinted that could be reprinted. It's a matter of what goes at what time.
Believe me, if the New Gods makes $1 billion, they're going to dig Jack up and put a pencil in his hand. Back to work.
Yes, Jack did.
How did Jack react to having things change? I'm very fond of the Race to the Moon cover #1, where there's a gorgeous cover, full surface of the moon. To publish it, they blacked out about half of it. Oh, too much moon. How did you react when people did whatever they wanted to the work? Did you figure that, I paid, so I don't care what happens to it, or were you
Nobody ever is satisfied with having their work change. Some people are better sports about it than others, and some people are more philosophical about it than others. Jack, when they started redrawing his Supermans at DC, Jack said, wanted to be a team player, wanted to be a good sport. He also realized he couldn't do a damn thing about it. So he kind of grudgingly said, yeah, well, you do what you have to do. And he almost convinced some people they were happy with it. He was such a good sport about it. But he wasn't, obviously. I think Jack would have cared more if they changed his stories than if they changed the drawings. Steve nods in agreement. You know, let me see if I can explain this way. Jack liked taking credit for his own work. He wanted his own work out there because he didn't want to coast on somebody else's shoulders. If he was doing a comic, if it was going to sell or not sell, he wanted it to sell or not sell because of what he did, not because of somebody screwing it up. So if he looked at what the changer did to it, he said, well, this is going to kill the sales of this book, he would not have been very happy, or the reception to the book. If he thought it was an arbitrary change that made no difference, it's fine, I'll go along, I want to be part of the team, I don't respect other people's right to have input. If they ruined it and he thought it was creatively worse, he would have been unhappy. Who wouldn't be?
The other thing to remember is that it would come out 3 months later, and Jack was already working on something else, so for him to stop and agonize over something that came out 3 months later was like, you know, not going to work. I remember when Cobra came out, and I was at the house, and he brought out the issue, and we both looked at it, and it was like, well, this isn't what we turned in. He was like, yep, I'm going back to Marvel. And that was that.
You know, I'll tell you this, one of the things that people don't get about Jack's problems with Marvel was he was working with Stan. It's a little difficult to explain. Here's what happened. Here's the January issue of Fantastic Four. Jack draws it, sends it in. You've all seen his marginal notes explaining how the story would go. Now he sits down, he's drawing the February issue of Fantastic Four, and he's halfway into it, and somebody calls him up and says, oh, by the way, we changed this character. When Stan dialogued the issue, January issue, changed this character from a polar bear into a live squid or something like that. Whatever it was, there's change. And all of a sudden, Jack's sitting there, and he's got the story half drawn, and he's got these pages that don't fit anymore. He's got to readjust his... So suddenly now he's drawn 6 pages he can't use. 6 pages he's not going to get paid for. And this happened to him many times with increasing problems at Marvel. His attitude was, leave my work alone because I want to be paid for it. He didn't want to have to keep course correcting. And also, the change had been made. It was too late for him to argue. They told him, we've changed this in the issue. Because he didn't see the issues until they came out usually. He'd send in the pencils, and the next thing he knows, it's too late to change anything. And he didn't have a chance to go to Stan and say, maybe you didn't understand what I wanted there, or maybe you didn't understand where I was going. And if you're doing continued stories, if you're running any sort of continued stories, sometimes you know that you put into this issue something that doesn't make sense here, but it's going to make sense next issue. We need this here in this issue to make the story work in this issue. And Jack would suddenly find out they'd taken this out of the first issue, and all of a sudden he had a vital piece missing from the second part. And that frustrated him greatly for, among other reasons, economic. Whenever he drew a page that couldn't be used, he wasn't paid. That was an increasing problem as he worked at Marvel. And of course, you know, we found when we worked for Jack, we had a pile of leftover Thor and Fantastic Four pages that didn't fit into anything. And then, you know, once in a while he'd find a place to stick one in later and use it. But for the most part, he had all these pages that were perfectly beautiful, great Kirby pages with great stuff on them. And he wasn't able to be paid for them. And he hadn't done anything wrong. You know, it was not like they were rejected because they were badly drawn. They hadn't even been submitted because there was no place for them in the stories he was turning in. Is that a question? Sir. Carmine Infantino came out. He had some girlfriend who was reading and buying Young Lust comics. And we had this meeting. Steve, myself, Carmine, his girlfriend, Jack, and Roz. And Steve and I said absolutely nothing. And Carmine was talking about the New Gods, Forever People, Mr. Miracle, which at this point were like issue 5 or so. We're doing fine. We're in the black. I keep saying in the black, which was for DC at that point was really good because a lot of stuff wasn't in the black. And Jack, by virtue of no longer doing Jimmy Olsen, because they had settled the whole In the Days of the Mob and Spirit World stuff, Jack had to add some projects to his line, to his productivity, to make his page score. Jack had to do a certain number of pages per week. And just drawing New Gods for This Miracle bi-monthly would not numerically equal those things. So we had some discussion. Stop me if I say anything that you'll remember here. Either making New Gods into a monthly book, or Jack wanted to add another new Fourth World book. And the two that were talked about were Big Barda, or Female Furies, and Lonar, L-O-N-A-R, which was kind of a Jack's Conan riff in the Fourth World. And we talked about both of those. And Jack said to Carmine, I also want to do a book that I'll edit and other people write and draw. And we did not realize at that moment, and Jack did not realize, how DC would never let him do that. They just didn't, if they weren't getting Jack Kirby artwork in the book, then they wanted it edited in New York and controlled by the New York people. So Carmine said, come up with an idea for a book and we'll do it. So Jack went home and he turned to us the following weekend and he said, Captain Marvel. DC should buy the rights to Captain Marvel. And I said, well, is that going to cost money? And Jack said, Fawcett had discontinued Captain Marvel and agreed never to produce it without DC's permission. And Jack said, who else can they sell it to? It's a one-buyer market. So Jack had me contact C.C. Beck. I knew someone who knew C.C. Beck. I got in touch with him. And C.C. Beck said he would be glad to draw Captain Marvel again. And Jack wanted to do the book. He would edit it, and he would help us write it. We'd write Captain Marvel, and C.C. Beck would draw it. And then he presented this thing to Carmine, and Carmine said, that's a great idea. I'm going to have it done in New York. Remember that, Steve? Yeah. And at that point, we kind of went, well, nothing's going to happen here.